Welcome to Occupations, the podcast, where we discuss what it's like to hold specific jobs. Occupations is brought to you by lotsofmaps.com, where you fulfill your vintage map gifting needs. Visit lotsofmaps.com.
Hello and welcome to Occupations, the podcast. We are doing episode number 16, I believe it is now, which is unbelievable. We've been doing this for almost a year and a half, and we're having a lot of fun, and people are enjoying it. They don't want to hear me, but they're enjoying the guests, which is fine. But unfortunately, somebody has to ask the question, so it'll be me. Today we have Mike Nowlan, Senior Managing Director at Accordion, and he's going to join us and tell us about something that we don't know a lot about, I don't think. So that's what's going to make it really, really great. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks, Andy.
Your house is lovely. We're in Mike's home, and it's lovely, and I'm very excited to find out more about what Accordion does and what Mike does. So let's start there.
Sure.
Tell me a little bit about Accordion and what they do.
Accordion is a financial consulting firm that specializes in helping usually companies that are backed or have been funded by private equity, and specializing in the area around Office of the Chief Financial Officer. So think about whatever a chief financial officer is responsible for. Accordion has a service line to help them out in a particular area. So it could be budgeting, closing the books faster, prepping for a sale of the company or prepping to go public, technical accounting issues, things like that. My area is in turnaround and restructuring, which is kind of contrary to what most of my firm is focused on. But my job is to help those companies that maybe aren't performing as well as everyone had hoped they would be, and try to fix things if we can, potentially restructure.
So what if somebody came to you and said, "Hey, Mike, what do you do?" What's an answer that will explain what you do in layman's terms?
I mean, it's really trying to fix a company that's constrained by something. So I don't help companies, with like growth plans or things. So my expertise or experience has been in areas where a company has got too much debt, running out of cash or liquidity, and probably underperforming operationally. Usually it's all three of those things.
So I would think that a big variety of folks that are listening now have worked at one time or another for a company, and maybe a company that's not performing well. And your firm is the one they would call to say, help, we need to figure out what to do from the executives down.
Yeah, that would be the ideal.
Okay.
Oftentimes, though, it's someone telling the management of the company, the CEO or the CFO, hey, things aren't going great. You should contact me or someone like me at my firm.
Right.
So that could come from a lender, a lawyer, a board member. It's pretty rare for a management team to kind of raise their hand and say help.
Because they don't want to ruffle the feathers of the CEO, or they wouldn't have that information necessarily.
I think it's the niche that I'm in is kind of specialized, and it's not something we're not like a McKinsey consulting. So we're not, as an industry, kind of well known. And I think it's hard to ask for help when you're facing, oh my God, we can't make payroll next week.
Yeah, I can turn this around myself. Something like that.
Yeah, or it's, oh my God, it's so bad. What do we even do?
Sure. So how often is it at that point where it is literally like we can't make payroll? Is that a common story that you're hearing? It's that bad? It's right at the end of...
It's not common, but it's a meaningful percentage. It could be, 20%, 25%. And it may not be we can't make payroll next week, but it may be, wow, in 2 months we can't make payroll.
Right.
So a lot of what I talk about is, cash flow runway.
All right. So let's take it from the flow of what happens. So let's just say, and I'll make up a scenario, but let's just say somebody in the company, let's say management or like you said, maybe a banker or somebody outside of the company says, hey, I don't know if you looked at the numbers recently, but yeah, not good. So you should call Mike. And Mike gets a call. And what are the first things that you're interested in finding out from them? Are you looking at their books?
Yeah, I mean, I'm primarily looking at financial information, financial results, monthly income statements, balance sheet, cash flow, and also looking at projections. You know, it kind of, the first thing I look at is really that liquidity position, like how that is going to sort of dictate the options that we have. So it's one thing if, you know, payroll is due tomorrow and you can't make payroll. It's another thing if they're looking out, well, 6 months from now, we're not going to be able to make this debt payment or something like that. Right. So that's really the first thing I look at. And then it's really just understanding the situation. That's one of the reasons why I love this. What I do is every situation is a little bit different.
Sure.
It's a range of industries. And I got a call one time for a biotech company, and the main driver of why they had reached out to me was because they had a shareholder that was going to sue them. And if it went to trial and there's all sorts of governance issues around that, the management team would have lost confidence in them. They wouldn't have been able to raise equity, and it caused this whole kind of chain reaction.
So if I understand this right, so the shareholder was going to sue for lack of performance for the most part?
There was a lot of issues around the potential shareholder suit, but some of it was ego-driven, who could control the company,
right?
Who could say who was going to run the company, things like that.
Too many cooks in the kitchen,
exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly.
So, all right. So you examine the books, and I'm sure there's a wide range of what you find in the books, but give me a scenario up the middle that's probably the most common that you do see. What is the scenario, and what is there to do in that scenario for you?
It's a good question. I think the fairly typical scenario is something like this. It's call it a manufacturing company, maybe $100 million in sales. They've got some loans with a bank. They've been underperforming slightly, tripping covenants with the bank. And usually banks will work with companies to forbear and say, you know what, we acknowledge the covenant, keep going. And then it's usually after tripping 3 or 4 covenants over time, they say, all right, you need to hire somebody. And they'll say, here's 3 firms, hire one of them. They're going to look at your business plan and your liquidity profile. And that's oftentimes how we start. And then I have an interview, usually with the CFO or CEO of the company. And hopefully they pick me based on either my approach or the fee structure or for some reason. And then we start to work. And that's where we try to diagnose what's going on. And then what happens after that really depends on what the root cause of the problem is. And it's usually pretty time constrained too. So it's difficult to figure out what's going on in a space of 2 or 3 weeks or 4 weeks, which is usually when we usually have about 2 to 4 weeks to try to figure out what's going on.
That's pretty quick. They pick you for a reason. Obviously, you've got experience in doing this. That's got to be probably the number one thing, is that you've done this over and over again. Could it be going through their heads like, well, this guy knows nothing about my business?
It's absolutely going through their head.
Right.
And I try to acknowledge that up front. The best scenario is when the management team acknowledges they could use some help. And so where I can be helpful is in the context of the situation they're in. I don't have any particular industry experience specialty.
Right.
But if I can demonstrate some expertise in that situation, then I can hopefully collaborate with the management team, and together we figure out what the range of options is to try to fix things.
That's great. So we were just visited by Winnie the dog, which is a beautiful, what is the breed?
Golden Retriever.
Golden. Yeah, beautiful. She's only 9 months old, and she's throwing her bone all over the place. So thank you, Winnie, for making an appearance. Now we have to give her an appearance fee. Thanks. So anyway, back to what we were talking about. So there must be some resentment by folks, whether it's, I can't imagine that the whole team would be on board of, yes, let's hire Mike. Let's bring this guy in here to sort of rearrange our company, a total outsider. I would imagine there's some skepticism. How is that received by you? That must be tough.
Yeah, it is. It is tough. It's unfortunate, but I get it. The last thing a cash-strapped company wants to do is spend money on a consultant. So it is tough. That's also why a lot of times the reason we get hired is because someone tells them they really need to.
Yeah.
So it's like the bank saying, listen, we're not going to loan you any more money unless you hire somebody. Or it's the board saying, you're going to lose your job unless you hire somebody.
Yep.
And I get some referrals from lawyers too, who they don't have the hammer, but a strong suggestion, like, you know what, we've seen companies like this, and they hire somebody and it helps them a lot.
Sure.
Even though you may not want to.
When you pitch to them, what kind of numbers are you throwing at them as far as success rates? You don't do that. Okay.
Success is really hard to define.
True.
Sometimes the success is, it's a little bit like, I don't know, being a surgeon in a MASH unit, kind of. It's
meatball surgery.
It's meatball surgery. Sometimes it's too late. Sometimes a good outcome is a graceful death, which sounds awful, but depending on the circumstance.
Radar, put that mask on.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so how do you sell yourself then? Obviously, if you're not using success rates, I mean, is it literally financial, or is there something else that you use to sell?
It's pretty qualitative. It's going to be, again, it depends on the context. So, for example, in the situation I outlined, where it's a lender saying, we're not going to lend you any more money until you hire somebody. Well, the company's got to hire somebody.
Yeah, right.
And so then it's going to come down to between me and 2 or 3 other firms or people. And
you know how they typically choose?
I don't. Sometimes when I win, sometimes I find out.
Yeah.
When I lose, I don't.
It's hard.
It's hard to figure out what happened.
I would imagine that if you've worked in that industry before, that would be something that you would say, right?
Yeah,
you would probably
absolutely.
pitch that.
Yeah, like I've done a lot of retail store kind of chain restructurings.
Yep.
That's very helpful. I haven't done any healthcare in 20 years, and I don't even pitch those anymore because the healthcare environment's so changeable. And there are people who know that industry, and it's really helpful.
Yeah.
There's some other weird industries like car dealerships. I don't do that. There are people that have done it. The nuances are very real. Oil and gas exploration, another one. I did one once, and it was really tough just to learn the lingo.
Yeah, that's big business too, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so buy-in. A management team, if they all buy in, how much easier is that? I mean, obviously it's going to be easier on you because the tension's gone and all of that. But how does that feed into potentially being more successful than if you're feeling pushback from some of the management folks?
Yeah, it's a good question. Some tension is actually really good.
Good.
And some pushback is good.
Explain that.
I will not know their industry or company as well as they do. And some ideas or thoughts that I may have may just be stupid or didn't fully understand the context of everything. So that's why it's the best outcomes are where I may be asking kind of dumb questions or obvious questions and they come back with answers. It's collaborative. That's where it's at. And then that often comes from just working with them for a little while, which is why, if we have more runway to try to figure things out, there's a better chance of success as well. The success being like there's a healthy company on the other side. One of the things I've noticed, and I'm still trying to figure out the answer to this, is pre-COVID, if I got a call on a deal, sort of the reaction was, all right, we'll fly out there, we'll be on the ground whenever, it could be next day, could be Monday.
Right.
And we'll be there 4 or 5 days a week. We'll set up like a conference room. There'll probably be, depending on the size of the engagement and the company, 2 to 6 of us in that room working with you. We'll want access. We're probably working 10, 12-hour days. The company sees us working that hard. We're usually there after everyone else is gone. And that helped demonstrate a lot of goodwill, like, oh, these guys are working hard. We'd a lot of times have lunch with them, like catered lunch, lunch is brought in, or grab dinner with them afterwards and breaking bread with them. Then COVID happened, and I had a couple of engagements where I'd already established the rapport with the management team, and those went well. But when I noticed while COVID was still going and I had new engagements, there was a real lack of rapport with the management team. It kind of became a little bit more transactional, and we would still be working really hard, but I'm working hard in my house. They couldn't see it. There's something about breaking bread with somebody and getting to know them a little bit better that broke down some of those barriers.
That goes for most industries, I would think. I know, in businesses that I work in, or if I've worked in the past, there's nothing like shaking somebody's hand, looking them in the eye, and showing your honesty and your hard work, like you said. And I would imagine that's a big part of building trust.
Yeah, it's funny and it seems obvious, but it took me a while to figure that out.
Yeah.
I was noticing like outcomes weren't feeling as good as they were in some really tough situations pre-COVID. So now I'm trying to figure out what the right mix of sort of being there and not being there. Even with companies, like management teams are dispersed. So you could have a CFO in Ohio, CEO in Texas, and
right.
manufacturing plant in Kansas. And it's like, where do you even go?
Right. Well, just to stay on that COVID thing. So when COVID happened, there was a lot of businesses that were out of it. I mean, They were done or sinking fast. Did your business pick up big time during that time, or was it just
the busiest I had ever been? Yeah. Which is good for me. Tough for the world. But,
sure. Of course. Wouldn't it be nice if you weren't needed, right, Mike? Because everybody's doing great.
Lotsofmaps.com. Vintage, local, national, and world maps for an affordable price. 99% of our maps are $25 or less. Great as gifts. Frame them or put them under glass for your home, vacation home, or as a memory of a special place. Lotsofmaps.com.
So you really have to have a crash course in a totally different business than you, in some cases, a business you know nothing about.
Yeah, I love that part.
Yeah.
That's actually my favorite part.
Well, and, similarly, that's what this podcast is all about. Because, I work in the video world regularly, and I'm interviewing people from different companies that I know nothing about it. And the education that I've got in other industries has been phenomenal, and I'm a geek for it. And that's what started this show, because I figured if I find out something different about a different industry, maybe somebody else would be interested. So I totally understand what you're talking about, because you get an education quickly. Your mind has to figure out what's happening, right?
Yeah.
So how do you do it that's quick. You got to work fast as far as doing that. Now, I know you're breaking down numbers mostly.
Yep.
But understanding how they sell, how they market, and things like that how they manufacture must play a role, correct?
It does. My degree is kind of an MBA in finance. So I gravitate to looking at the numbers and, like reading the bank docs. I do a lot of just internet research on the industry. I'll look at if there are competitors in the same space that are public. I'll read some of that. So it's a bunch of reading on my own. And then
I imagine you ask a lot of questions.
I ask a lot of questions, which is another great benefit. I'm realizing this just as we're talking, but those lunches and dinners with the CFO and the CEO pick up a ton of stuff there, which is super helpful.
I imagine you're learning things from kind of any kind of conversation and talking about any aspect of the business, correct? I mean,
and we're trying to find the few things that can unlock some value that might be critical.
Do you ever become an efficiency expert in some case?
Really. That's like, going back to the MASH analogy. I'm a MASH surgeon. And if it comes to an area of like, well, this person can increase your sales force efficiency by 20%.
It's too late for that.
It may not be. It may be part of the plan.
Okay.
But I wouldn't be that person. I would defer to another like really expert in that area. Or there's something like this comes up quite a bit in like manufacturing, which is, we need to lower costs in manufacturing. We can identify that's a cause, but I would defer to someone else who's an expert in that area to help them.
Would that be enough to save a company that's already calling you?
Yeah. So, for example, in a manufacturing company, I had a client, and I'm not a manufacturing person, but walking through the plant, I could just tell they were inefficient. I couldn't tell them how they should redesign their workflow, but I knew enough to know that was an issue. And what I was able to do is kind of link that to company performance and say, listen, if we can increase this by X%, this will really help us now. And if we do that, plus, you know what, guys, you haven't raised prices in 3 years. Let's raise prices. Let's fix the flow. Let's sell off some old obsolete inventory to raise some cash. So there's different components of the plan that when you put them all together, get you to the other side.
I imagine it's probably received sometimes poorly that you want to do something somewhat drastic in their eyes, like selling off old inventory, let's say. I mean, maybe this guy's been in that business since he was a young person and has some sort of emotional attachment to certain things that you look at and say, that's just cash sitting in the corner. Let's get rid of that.
Yeah, I had a real tough time convincing the engineers to get rid of stuff. They wanted to keep it around.
Yeah, I imagine
I bet you have that problem with like old sound equipment, Andy.
I do, actually. Wow, you're good. You're absolutely right. Sometimes it's tough to move on, but I don't know. Yeah, you sort of know it inside and out, and you kind of think there's value there, but no one else sees value in it.
There was, I don't know who said it, but there's some kind of quote like, "Don't let a good crisis go wasted."
Right.
Something along those lines. The crisis helps drive change.
Sure.
So it's like, if you don't do this, you're going to die.
Right. But some people can't help themselves.
Some people can't help themselves.
And that's where you come on.
Right.
Right. All right. So let's look at a scenario that is not so good. Let's look at one where, okay, we need to do some serious stuff. Now, you talked about cash flow being probably the key to this whole thing.
Yeah.
You think that is number one?
That's number one.
Yeah. All right. So let's look at a situation where things are not good and you need to suggest some drastic moves. How do you, go about suggesting? That must be a gulp moment where you're just like, okay, I got to lay it down and give this guy some bad news right now.
Yeah.
How is that done?
That one's usually the scenario where it's too late.
Yeah.
So there was an example, a company had trip covenants. Bank said, hey, you need to bring in somebody. We took a look at their cash flow and business plan and identified some risks. And one of those risks was it was a distribution business and they were paying their trade very late. We identified the risk and said, you know what, they need X million dollars. Otherwise, they're going to run the risk that the trade stops and in distribution business,
And they're done.
it's dead.
Yeah.
So we did our work. I think we finished up our report right before Christmas. 2 months later, we got another call. Basically, the trade had stopped. They didn't get more money into the company, and we had to go into a triage mode of, all right, is there a piece of the business that's salvageable? We had to help the management team basically lay off a bunch of people and try to do a hurry up sale process of the company while we liquidating inventory at deep discounts just to try to keep things afloat. We had a couple of potential buyers come in and look at the business, and we eventually were able to get somebody that came in and bought the bank debt at a deep discount. And the business survived, but it was a tough one.
Yeah. I imagine pennies on the dollar at a fire sale. You see somebody struggling, you're not going to necessarily put your hand up and say, okay, I'm going to throw a bunch of money into this business that's about
right.
to fail.
Yeah.
So bargain basement purchases, potentially certain assets you can buy to maybe add to your business, or
Sure.
a piece of a business that you maybe want to expand into a different
Be a great
track.
opportunity. And in fact, I've done some of that work for, call it, buy-side opportunities. And it's,
So there's no specific route. I guess what you're saying is you're looking for those assets to try to raise cash.
there's managing the cash flow. So we can certainly try to do that through improving operations. That usually takes a little bit longer. So there's typically multiple facets of the plan. One of them is to reduce the investment in working capital. So how do we collect our receivables faster? Is there dead inventory we can sell off? Can we stretch the trade a little bit? In that other example, they couldn't. But sometimes companies continue to pay their vendors too quickly. And so there's opportunities there.
Yeah.
And then there might be other assets that can be monetized. Sometimes real estate can be, especially in founder-owned businesses, real estate can be part of a refinancing package. There's also more lending that's being done these days on intellectual property. So if you're a company that's got a good brand name or a piece of technology or patent that no one else has.
Are you talking about selling that off, or is
You can maybe not selling it off, depending on how core it is to the business.
using it as collateral?
Using it as collateral. Yeah, exactly.
That's a clever way to sort of get around things, is look at the equity that's been built into whatever it is that you have and squeeze out some money out of it.
Right.
Desperation moment. Obviously, when it's time to go, you must get into scramble mode. You must have a way to sort of say, okay, fire sale time. We need to fire some folks. We need to. I mean, that must be a tough thing to swallow. But you're gonna have to do it.
It's
part of the job.
It sucks. One of my first deals when I started out doing this, I was at a textile mill up in Lawrence, and I was only 28 at the time, and the partner I was working for, he had a really nice BMW, and so we were planning layoffs for that day, and he decided not to come to the client.
Yeah, I'm that's always the resentment part of people that get laid off, is they say, well, of course, but the owner and the stockholders are doing fine, and I'm the first to go out the door. But that's usually not the case, right?
Right. There's definitely, especially like every once in a while, there's a wave of like 10% layoffs in public companies. All these companies announce 10%. It's always magical 10% layoffs. I think that's different from what we're doing. We're unfortunately like cutting off the arm to save the body that would otherwise die. It's different.
Do you think that people running businesses now are running leaner than they used to because of, let's say, computers have been able to show you analytics on things that you probably never used to see before?
I don't know. I'm kind of generally focused on like the companies in trouble. I mean, technology is definitely huge in the finance accounting function. I mean, even on our own teams, like what some of these young people coming out of college can do in Excel and some other like kind of basic software programs is amazing. Like where we would probably, one young person now can probably do the work of 3 or 4 20 years ago.
Do they come up with new ideas of how to save things? I mean, are there things that they're
better.
seeing?
They're just better at it. The software has gotten better. Like, and even just talking about Excel or Power BI or Tableau or some of these things around that can analyze big blocks of data quickly. It's computing power. And I'm not a computer person at all. Sure. But they're able to analyze things way faster than I used to be able to.
You use an abacus, I assume?
13-column paper and a calculator. I pulled out an HP calculator, and none of the 20-something-year-olds knew what it was. Some of the things that I've seen with some of my clients around the technology has been sometimes they have technology that's old because they haven't had the capital to invest in it. Some of it is they have new technology, but they haven't learned how to use it or integrate it with their other platforms, call it. Integrating, like doing analysis where we take pieces of information from different systems seems like that's hard to get at. Again, for some companies that haven't made the investment in people or systems. But I haven't been in a really well-run company, so I'm not sure what really good looks like. I can just kind of imagine.
You know how not to do things.
Yeah, I've seen some of the mistakes.
Yeah. That's interesting. I would imagine a business that's trying to do well by things could get some advice from you on how, obviously, things that you shouldn't do, right? I bet you're valuable in that way, even a healthy company.
Sometimes we've seen several clients that have had trouble with like a rollout of a new system that didn't go well. And after several months of that had ended up causing operational problems in their supply chain or inventory management, and hard to recover from that. So I couldn't say much other than like if you are changing out an IT, like a ERP system, to spend the money to do it the right way, because it could be catastrophic if it's not done the right way.
All right, let's look at the other extreme. A company that is heading towards disaster but is salvageable. How do you approach that aspect of things where, I would imagine you're not telling them you got to shake up the whole thing. You're saying a couple of moves here, we can make some saves here. How do you deal with that aspect?
Well, let me, maybe I could twist that a little bit.
Sure, please.
There's some of the best examples of success have been where the CEO and or the CFO have decided, we've got something going on here, we need some help, like on their own, without being told. And those have been the most successful engagements, and super collaborative. And a lot of times those instances have come from people that I knew from other engagements. Like they were at a company, went through a tough restructuring, they moved on to a new situation. They see something that's going a little bit sideways and they say, oh, let's bring in some help to start looking at this. I've done that for a few times and it's gone well. Worked in the grocery space. That was really interesting.
Which aisle?
Every aisle. And helped put together kind of some like contingency plans to try to unlock value. They were able to use that as part of their process that when they sold themselves to a private equity firm, and they were able to get a good valuation in part because of this work that they had done. Another situation was an e-commerce company that knew it wanted to exit a line of business and wanted some help in how to do that. So we helped them with that, and that helped preserve the rest of the business. And we did it sort of very orderly, collaboratively, and some people had to lose jobs, but it was a lot of all sort of reallocating people to healthier parts of the business.
Sure, I suppose rearranging to make it more efficient,
Right.
and better management structure probably helps in a lot of ways too.
Yeah.
So I would imagine your biggest piece of advice would be to not put a jacuzzi in your office.
Yeah, that and private planes. Maybe don't get the private plane.
Not a good investment. All right, let's talk a little bit about you. Where'd you go to school first? Where'd you grow up, first of all?
I grew up in Connecticut on the beach in Milford. I went to school at Bentley over here in Waltham, and stayed in the Boston area after Bentley. I met my wife and started going to Babson part-time to get my MBA.
So you didn't have your eyes set on this particular type of job.
No, not at all. I completely fell into it. I was an econ major undergrad. I painted houses and worked in a restaurant through college and tutored a little. And then when I fell into my first job as a temp in credit and collections and worked into a financial analyst role. I liked working with numbers. It's math, but it's not calculus, it's algebra. And then had changed jobs and decided, at my first job, they had a tuition reimbursement program. I'm like, I should just take advantage of this. So that's when I started at my MBA at Babson part-time. I was working for a family office out of Hingham, and they had multiple companies. And I was working on one that was a waste paper recycling mill in Fitchburg, Mass. It was really cool, but the engineering didn't work. And they had borrowed $245 million to finance the project. So the engineering didn't work. With every ton of pulp we made, we were losing money. It was just bad. It was like a big washing machine. So I was around 27, I think, and picture a family office, really smart people. They had some super successful projects. The CFO wanted to spend her time on those projects, not the troubled one. Totally fair. So I got to do a lot much earlier than I thought. And the bondholders hired Arthur Andersen to come in and do what I do now. Look at the business plan, assess the liquidity, look at options. And I was the main interface with the Arthur Andersen team. And I just thought whatever they were doing was really interesting. I'm like, wait, you guys go all around the country and this is what you do. Because up until that point in my career, I'd never been in a troubled situation. And I just thought it was really interesting. And like the owners of the family business, like I met with them every week to talk about what was going on in the business. It was kind of exciting. So that project ended up getting turned over to the bondholders. They basically became the new owners. And I stayed on with the family office for about another year. And I found a job with a small boutique consulting firm in Boston called the Recovery Group that did what Arthur Andersen's team did. And that's how I started. So completely fell into it. It wasn't really a well-known industry. I didn't know it existed, but I liked the problem solving and learning new industries and new companies.
So I understand the excitement of it. Is it that you sort of like a detective in a sense that you need to discover what the problem is?
Yeah, there's a diagnosis part of it that I find really interesting. And then putting the plan together to try to, fix things.
So you must feel awesome if you can turn around a failing business.
I do.
That
it's
must
so
feel
hard.
So
though.
good.
It's so hard. It's really hard. Usually it's working it out to try to save it for another day. Because the way we're set up, we're getting paid sort of hourly or monthly retainer type of thing, and we can't stay on forever.
Right.
So we need to kind of move on.
But just the feeling of you must get champagne sent to you or whatever, just like, hey, Mike, you've saved our asses here. Let's make sure this guy feels what we feel. That must feel good.
It does feel good when we have successful outcomes. Absolutely. And I've developed friendships with clients. You know, there's something when you're in the trenches together trying to fix things, you develop good relationships. A lot of times, though, in the situations, someone somewhere is losing money. And so it might be an owner, maybe a lender, a trade creditor, employees. So while it could be successful, someone is probably feeling some pain, different than maybe like an IPO where everybody's making money.
Yeah.
So there's usually something that's like, didn't go great for somebody.
Being the optimist that I am, though, what would have been the alternative? Everyone would have been hurt, right?
If someone can understand what the alternative was, then there's usually, yes, let's all go out and celebrate with a big dinner and
right.
That
must feel good. And on the other hand, it must be just awful to not be able to help.
It doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
And that part of the business is tough.
When you first get together with a client, do they give you an indication of which way they want this thing to go? Do they ever say, I'm tired, I got to get out, we got to find a way to sell this thing?
Yeah, sometimes they do. And that's usually something depending on the context, again, like, what do you want to try to do? Like, what's your goal here?
Got it.
Just to try to set expectations around what's, and then I might have a thought or opinion around what might be achievable given the context that may or may not align with what they.
Is that a regular thing? Do you usually
try to ask that? Yeah.
I would imagine that helps save some time because you're probably looking to save things that may not want to be saved, or hey, let's sell off assets when they're just kind of like, you know what? Honestly, I want out. I'm sure that probably saves a lot of time.
Yeah, it could.
In your research.
Too. And sometimes they say, well, I'm just doing this because the bank told me. And that's a tough situation to be in.
Yeah, the big old bank.
Yeah.
So, Mike, do you have any interesting stories that twists and turns and things like that?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of them have some nuances and interesting twists and turns. One of them that I think about is Shreve Crump and Lowe, which is the famous jeweler up here in Boston.
Sure.
They also had a few stores down in Richmond, Virginia, called Schwarzschild's. Really great jewelry stores, high quality. We were going through, basically looking to find assets to try to raise some money. And the controller opened up the safe, and we were going through the safe, and we found these like pendants with George Washington sort of silhouetted onto them. They weren't listed anywhere on our balance sheet or records, and no one really knew what they were. And so we started doing a little bit of digging, and we found out that they were mourning pendants. So they were these pendants that were given out at funerals.
Oh my!
A couple hundred years ago, when notable people died, they would create these pendants and hand them out. And we started to get very excited, thinking, "Wow, this if this is George Washington's mourning pendant, this could save the company."
Wow!
And we found through some more research, we found a professor at the University of Virginia that specialized in sort of understanding and analyzing these things. So we were one of our new hires, or one of our young consultants. We told her to set up a meeting with the professor and get ready to drive the pendant up to University of Virginia and have her take a look at it. And we were really excited because we were really afraid that we were going to have to liquidate the whole company. So the consultant set up the meeting with the professor, and just through the dialogue and a picture of it, Unfortunately, the professor said, "Well, it's a replica, and it's unfortunately not worth anything." So
No value at all.
not really.
Yeah.
I mean, it was worth a little bit, but we were thinking maybe tens of millions of dollars, which would have been significant.
Yeah.
Something you never know what you find when you're going through like an old safe.
Yeah, that's well, and in jewelry too. I mean,
Right.
chances are you might find something that
Right.
has some value, but especially not something off the books. Any other stories, Mike?
I have a good friend of mine that I worked together on a deal. We always talk about this whenever we get together for beer. It was a company in Iowa, Postville, Iowa. They were a meat processor, kosher product for kosher products. So Postville, Iowa is in the middle of nowhere. It's like a population of 1,500 people. And this company was in trouble with their bank. The bank hired us to go in and take a look around. So my friend and I figured out the best way to go there. We flew into Chicago and then drove for hours and hours through cornfields to get there. And we showed up, and it started off oddly, like they wouldn't let us in. They made us park like a mile away from the plant outside the gate. We finally had to walk in, and we were known as the consultants from Boston. And we're walking in and we see all these young guys, young rabbis with like Yankee caps on and long knives at their belts. And they were heckling us the whole way in, and we got there. And so this was a kosher meat processor. All the chickens, all the cows killed by hand. All the chickens were killed by these young rabbi like students. The cows were killed by older rabbis. It's just an incredibly interesting atmosphere. So the company was founded by the Rabashkins, who owned a deli in Brooklyn. And they, at some point, realized they were having trouble sourcing meat. And so they bought a defunct meat processing plant in Iowa. One of the sons moved out there, and they built up this business. So it was this very strange environment where the owners were Brooklyn Jews. Middle management was all these Midwesterners. And then they had the labor was really like new immigrants. And so this town of Postville, Iowa had, I think, more rabbis per capita than anywhere in the world, except for maybe Brooklyn and Israel. It was just a strange place.
The Jews of Iowa. Wow. The rabbis of Iowa.
Rabbis of Iowa. And they were Yankees fans too, so they hated us. I'm not sure why if they hated us more because we were consultants looking at their business or
the Red Sox connection.
Red Sox connection. Yeah. So I spent some time out at that plant. And again, they weren't too thrilled with us because we were there because the bank told them we had to be.
Right.
So they made us stay, like we had to work in the chicken kill supervisor's office, which was not heated. Everything was covered in chicken fat. It was really...
I bet it smelled lovely.
It was not great. We actually ended up in a pretty good relationship with the owners because we were able to... They were really smart, and we were able to help them like sort of problem solve around a few things. And
you can't cut corners on kosher.
No, and they didn't. It was very good quality, and I saw how I got to see how a hot dog was made.
Ugh.
And I am a huge proponent of the kosher hot dogs.
Don't tell us we're not supposed to know what's
it's all good stuff. The kosher ones anyway.
Okay,
they're hot dogs.
Hey, we learned something. See, I never would think a financial guy would know about hot dogs, but that's what you get on this show. So that's awesome. So, Mike, you're going into a business that is close to failing or is having some serious trouble. How do you guarantee getting paid by them? That must be a hard thing to sort of say, hey, we can't make payroll, but we can pay these guys.
Yep. Well, we ask for a retainer up front.
Yeah.
And then frequent billings. But I've been caught. I had a tough deal where I was the chief restructuring officer of a company, and it was manufacturing, and we were running tight on liquidity, and I chose, I was helping direct payments and I chose to buy parts instead of paying my firm's fees, thinking we had a path out. And then it just sometimes, this is the other thing that can happen in tough situations where even when you have a plan, if you can't get everyone on board with the plan, you're not going to have success. And basically the bank couldn't get on board with the plan. So, and it was because we made a proposal to them that they needed to haircut their debt because the alternative was much, much worse. They didn't see it that way. And so we couldn't do anything. And the business ended up shutting down very abruptly. The bank lost a lot of money, but usually we try to protect ourselves on the fees by being a little smarter than I was there.
Yeah. I got to ask this, but have you gone to a company that just can't afford you because they have nothing left?
There are situations where it's just too late. There's no money to hire advisors. And that's unfortunate. So that happens.
I know this is a general weird question and you're going to say there's no way to answer this, but do you have any advice to businesses when they start to see some sort of downturn? Is it call us sooner rather than later? Or, I mean, do you have any advice?
That's great advice. I'd say don't be afraid to ask for help, and it doesn't cost anything to have a conversation.
Yeah.
And I talk to people. Sometimes I'll have many conversations with people before we're engaged, or sometimes not engaged, and then at least a little bit more.
Right.
And maybe the timing isn't right. Maybe it's for down the road when things get a little bit more hairy. So I definitely think that there's no shame in having the call, and I may not have any advice, and
yeah, sure.
And then you can move on. Sometimes just, situations are just tough, and there's
I imagine,
not a miracle.
I imagine seeing value in this, knowing you don't have to have a conversation like you said, but knowing that if you really want it done right, you're going to have to spend some money to bring in somebody. But maybe it's not right for me, and there's somebody else I know that might be a better fit for it. I think that's important, is trying to find the right fit. Not every company can hire a McKinsey, and McKinsey shouldn't work for every company. There's certain situations they'd be great. So it's finding the right size, personality, fit, all of that. Yeah. Any advice to somebody that wants to get into your type of business? I mean, obviously the business world is very, very vast, but you've got a specialty. Is there a path to this, or is it a general look, get your MBA and, are there classes that talk about your job specifically that would lean towards?
There are some. There's, I think Northeastern has a class on restructuring. Or reorganizations. There's definitely more of a path now than there was when I fell into it. There are firms like my old firm at FTI that hires right out of undergrad. Every year there's like a new class of graduates coming in. Our firm at Accordion, we're typically more experienced hires. So someone that's got a few years experience, maybe an MBA. Those are all good starts. There's a Turnaround Management Association, which has a lot of material on its website if you want to learn more. I've been thinking about, maybe I could teach something at a local school, maybe back at Bentley or Babson or another school. And I'm trying to think about the material and the way I would teach it. I found, like, having done case study work for my MBA, the cases are cool and they're interesting, but so unlike the real world and the big differences in the real situations, you're not sure what information is correct or not. And the data that you really need or want isn't always available.
Got it.
And so then what do you do?
Yeah. Well, and like you were saying, looking somebody in the eye and getting to understand their feelings are probably a big part of it too.
Huge part of it is, hanging out with the CEO who had just relocated to take on this job. And 6 months later, the company is failing. And he's like, I relocated my family. I have 2 houses now. I still haven't. So, and just being there to talk them through that. And
Yeah.
That's a big part of it.
Mike Nowlan, I don't know what to call you. Because you don't have, I mean, you have a title, but it doesn't necessarily explain what it is you do. We need to come up with a title for you that explains what you do, because senior managing director
yeah,
doesn't
it's
really
pretty
tell
generic.
us. So we need to come up with something. Business savior.
That sounds good. Might be reaching, but I like the sounds of it.
Mike Nowlan, business savior. Thank you so much for coming on Occupations. I hope you had a good time. And everybody else, stay tuned for another episode of Occupations coming soon.
Thanks, Andy.
Thank you.
Occupations has been brought to you by lotsofmaps.com. Please follow Occupations the podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to find information about our next episode or to see what past episodes are available.